contacts here as well, but I'll let her introduce those folks, and you can take it away. I'm going to be your person moving
great,
forward.
Thanks. Yeah, so first of all, thank you all for coming out. I'm really excited. How many of you are here because you're birders? Well, you guys are better off than me because I'm definitely not a birder. How many of you are here because you love Sandy Hook? Great. How many of you are here for the first time or maybe aren't regulars at Sandy Hook? Awesome, great, welcome. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about piping plovers, what some of the birds that there look like, and some of the reasons why we're protecting them. I have Annie is here. She's one of the seasonal biotechs, so she's going to be out on the beach working real hard all summer. We have two other biotechs that aren't here right now. Ellie and Connor, they had to go out and do a wildlife in distress call. They were here at the beginning, maybe they'll be back, and we'll have a few more here. So if you're out and working, you might see them. Please feel free to speak with them. And please feel free to count on us in natural resources and resource stewardship to be a resource for you for information. Okay, so what is a shorebird? So not being a birder, I find shorebirds are so much easier to see and identify because they're not up in trees, they're much bigger often, and there's no leaves in the way. But when you're looking at shorebirds, there's a couple of different things you look at. First of all, you're looking at the size. Legs are really important, beak is really important, shape of the body is really important. Next one, Jen. So you're going to look at relative size when you're thinking about identifying a bird. Is it the size of a robin, a crow, or a goose? What's the size and the shape of the bill, the body shape, the length, and think about proportions of the bill length to the head. And when you're using that guide that Jen showed you, those are the kind of things you're going to look at to be able to identify the birds that you're seeing. Behaviors and color patterns as well. But this is a guide that's our focus, the piping plover. And this is a bird that's in summer breeding plumage and coloration. And so piping plovers always have yellow legs. So if it's a bird without yellow legs, it's not a plover, no matter what time of year it is. In breeding plumage, they have a band around their neck. Generally, if it's a thicker band, it's a male. If it's a less, it may not be a complete band or it may not be as wide, and that's a female. They're not truly sexually dimorphic, so if you think of a cardinal, for example, the males are red, the females are drab brown. Plovers, males and females, look basically the same with the exception of that banding, and the banding isn't 100% true because if you sex them, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio with regard to the banding. The bills, in the summer, they'll have orange up by the face and then the tip will be black. In non-breeding plumage, that bill becomes completely black. And then there's also the band on the head there, that dark band there. So that's how you can identify a piping plover. They look a lot like some other birds that are out there. So the next few slides, we're just going to do a couple comparisons. But the plover is always going to be over on your right-hand side. So the semi-palmated plover, it's darker. Piping plovers are more of a buff. Semi-palmated are more of a brown. And they have a thicker breastband and they're just darker overall. The Wilson's plover, it has a bigger bill. See how long that bill is on there? And it has brown legs. So no orange legs, no plover. Killdeer. Killdeer typically aren't out on the beach, but I saw one last week up in our Jamaica Bay unit when I was out there monitoring. But you might see these in your driveway. If you have a gravel driveway, they might actually be nesting in your driveway. They're a bigger bird, and they have two of those breast bands, not one. Sanderlings. People always confuse plovers for sanderlings, and often you'll see sanderlings, usually large groups of them, and you'll often see plovers mixed in with them. And people often will say, I've had people say this to me often, why do you care about the plovers? There's so many of them, because they're thinking of the sanderlings. The sanderlings come through in the spring and the fall. They're migrating up to the Arctic. That's where they nest. But people will see lots of these little sanderlings. They have longer bills and dark legs. They're often in the intertidal zone running along feeding. But that's one that people commonly mistake as being a plover. So here's a comparison of the adult versus the juvenile. So we talked about the adult previously. In that juvenile, it's going to have a completely black beak. It's going to have those orange-yellow legs. And one of the things about plovers too is they have short and they have kind of like me, short legs, kind of stocky body. And the plover chicks too, the eye is just huge compared to their head. Go ahead. So there are 3 populations of piping plovers in the U.S. We are part of the Atlantic population. There's also a Great Lakes, and there's also a population out in the Great Plains. You can go ahead to the next one. And so under the Endangered Species Act, in 1986, piping plovers were listed as a federally protected species. And so the Endangered Species Act was 1973. That's kind of a confusing slide where I have 73 and then I say 86. But so in the Atlantic and the Great Plains, those populations are threatened. And in the Great Lakes, they're endangered. So the difference between threatened and endangered, there's no difference in the level of protection under the law, but there is a difference in terms of the imminency at which that species could be lost. So the Great Lakes population is so small that there's without really good protection, there's a really good chance that we could lose that population of piping plover. We have a little bit bigger populations in our Great Plains and Atlantic, but still without management, it would likely that they would go extinct in those areas as well. The state of New Jersey has identified piping plovers as endangered. And so within the Atlantic coast, there are 4 recovery units. And so for most species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act, there is a recovery plan that says these are the kinds of things we need to do to be able to help this species to succeed. And so we are in the New York, New Jersey recovery area. There's the southern states are the southern recovery area, and the plovers breed from North Carolina up into eastern Canada. There's a New England recovery area and an Eastern Canada recovery area. And on this slide, talk a little bit about what does it mean to recover this species. And so for the recovery plan has within each of those areas a target population. And I'm sorry, because this slide has 2016 data, and I was trying this week to get the more current data, and I didn't get it for today, so I apologize. But the target remains the same. So in New England, their target is 625. As of 2016, they had exceeded it, and they continue to exceed their population count. In New York and New Jersey, we've stayed pretty steady for a while, but our recovery number is to have 575 pairs. That's not individual, that's pairs. In the southern, their recovery number is 400, and in Canada, it's 400 as well. And you can see with the exception of the New England recovery area, none of the other 3 have reached their targets. And so the idea of having recovery areas is literally you don't want all your eggs in one basket. You want to see success across the geographic range of the species in order to consider the species moving to recovery. One of the other recovery targets is fledglings. And in our area, the fledgling rate there's different fledgling rates for each of the recovery units, but for the New York, New Jersey, it would be having 1.5 fledges, that's 1.5, and we don't cut the bird in half, but on average, 1.5 birds per breeding pair would actually make it at the end of the summer to be able to fly. That's what a fledgling is, to be able to fly. And so in New York and New Jersey, we want a 5-year average productivity of 1.5 birds per pair to have recovered. And again, you'd want to see that recovery rate, the fledgling rate, in all of those across the geographic distribution. And the recovery plan also then talks about management, what we need to do to manage. And so we use symbolic fencing. Some of you were out there this year and last year helping us put that up. We close beaches here at Sandy Hook. We have designated nesting beaches, and once we have chicks on the beach, we close those beaches down to all access. So you can't even walk along the shoreline. That lets the chicks get down and feed because they have to feed almost continuously for 4 weeks to be able to put on enough weight to be able to fledge and then to be able to successfully migrate. We do predator control. A big predator here at Sandy Hook are foxes. Other predators include hawks and crows. In some areas of the range, sand crabs can also be a predator, particularly on the chicks and the eggs. We can use predator exclosures. So to be able to protect the nest from predators, we put a wire cage around it to prevent them from getting in and getting at those eggs. And then public outreach and engagement, and that's where you are so important, helping people to understand what we're doing, why we're doing, and bringing them in as shared stewards of this resource. So this is just, and sorry, I have a few data slides. Sorry, that's who I am. So I just want to, just to tell you that I'm not making things up. So this shows the recovery level. The pink line is where we would need to be in terms of plover abundance to reach the recovery in each of these 4 recovery units. And you can see where New England is exceeding theirs and has for a good number of years now. Whereas in New York and New Jersey, we've hovered around our recovery population level a couple times, but we consistently stay below. And Eastern Canada and the Southern have not gotten above it either. So that's just a little bit of data to support that. This looks specifically at New Jersey. So this is looking from 1987 to 2022 in terms of, on the right-hand side is the number of pairs, and that's represented in these blue bars. So you can see how many pairs we've had nesting in the state of New Jersey since 1987. And then you can see in the black line, that shows the productivity. So there's that 1.5 line is the dashed line on it. And with the exception of 1 year, in New Jersey, we've stayed below that 1.5 productivity goal. And we've also been below, well, we don't have an individual state level for pairs, but combined with New York, we haven't reached the pair number either. This is for last year. The size of the star shows a relative proportion of the number of pairs of piping plovers nesting at beaches along New Jersey. And so in 2022, there are 118 pairs of piping plovers nesting in New Jersey at 26 sites. And the Holgate, Little Beach, the National Wildlife Complex, managed by Fish and Wildlife, has in the last couple years superseded Sandy Hook in terms of having the largest percentage of pairs nesting in the state. Sandy Hook comes in a steady second with 35% of all the pairs in New Jersey having nested at Sandy Hook last year. And Cape May is actually a success story for New Jersey because for a long time there used to be kind of an important site, and then there hadn't been pairs there for a while. And so the thought is there's been some increase in pairs in Delaware, and we think those birds are coming over, and we're getting some nesting now again in Cape May County. So this is just looking at, so here we have, these are the number of pairs. And so for one thing about piping plovers is if their nest isn't successful, they will nest sequentially. So it's not uncommon if nests aren't successful for them to nest 2 or 3 or even 4 times. So you can see last year we had those 118 nests with a total of 170 nest attempts, and 42% of those nests hatched. So with 55% of them failing and 3% we couldn't determine what was the status of that. So there is a fair amount of failure within any given nest. And those failures happen for several reasons. Depredation, that means something got to them and ate them. A lot of times we can't determine, 33% of the time, across the state couldn't determine what they were. Over half, nearly 60%, were from mammalian sources. That would be fox, raccoons, could include dogs. We don't have this issue here, but in other areas of the state, coyotes are becoming an increasing predator. And then there's 9% were from avian. Flooding. So this morning, maybe we already got some information back about the effect of this storm this weekend, but tomorrow, so the storm that we just had, and similar storms like that are not uncommon in the spring when nesting is happening, can flood out the nest, or the wind can blow so much that it will actually bury the nest too. Sometimes we just can't determine why it is. Sand blowing over, that's about 1%, and then abandonment. And abandonment often occurs because one of the adults will have been predated. And so the adults take turns, both incubating and for the initial rearing. Sometimes the female will leave earlier and the male is left rearing the brood. But if one of the adults is predated, is lost during the incubation, then the other adult will abandon that nest because they know they can't be successful on their own. So I wanted to give a little comparison about how we did at Sandy Hook last year compared to how New Jersey did overall. So there were 118 pairs, 33 of those were at Sandy Hook, 21 of the 33 successfully hatched. So at Sandy Hook we had a 64% success rate for our hatching, compared to the state overall was 55%. We had 28 of the state's 100 chicks were fledged at Sandy Hook, and our fledge rate at Sandy Hook last year was the same as it was for the state overall. And I just wanted to show this just so you can see over a trend. And one of the things that's interesting here is these are all post-Hurricane Sandy years. And for folks that had lived here during Hurricane Sandy, it was a truly devastating storm for communities. But for plovers, which are a species that relies on early successional habitat, so they need to have areas on the upper beach where there's not a lot of vegetation. And that's one thing storms do. They kind of reset the playing field. They create overwashes, they lower the dunes, they take out vegetation, and they create this early successional habitat that plovers thrive in. And so after Sandy, we saw a little bit of a bump here, but more or less over the last 10 years, we've had about 40 pairs nesting here at Sandy Hook. And there's been a little bit more variability throughout the state, going to almost, in terms of the total number of pairs, being from about 90 to almost 140 pairs over the last 10 years. So one of the reasons that we manage for plovers is because there's a lot of threats for them. And that's a main reason that they're listed, and why, quite honestly, they probably always need some kind of management, is that the places that plovers have evolved to complete their breeding cycle are the same places that we like to go and play. I love to go to the beach. There's nothing better on a nice summer day than going out and just chilling out on the beach and swimming. But if we don't make a space for these birds, they're not going to be able to succeed. So that loss of habitat through human development, Jonathan already talked a little bit about pets. Predation is a threat, and you might think, well, predation, it's part of nature, and it is. There have always been predators. But our society now, because of the way we manage trash, or by leaving litter and food out, or people purposely feeding wildlife, we increase predation pressures over what they might be without us here. Vehicles driving on the beach are a big risk, especially to chicks. Not only can they run them over, but tire tracks can allow a chick that can't fly yet, gets down in those tire tracks, and that's like trying to scale a skyscraper to get out of it. Our human disturbance is related to many of these things, but more particularly people just actively going into areas where they're breeding and disturbing. And then sea level rise is also an issue. As sea level rises, in many areas, there's not a lot of room for the beach to migrate because we have development behind it. So if there's a beach there and as sea level rises, if our beaches are getting narrower or if they're getting overwashed and flooded more frequently, that has an impact on the species as well. And so the next couple of slides, I just want to talk about some themes in terms of these threats and some of the things that you might want to think about if you're talking to someone about this. And so in terms of reducing human disturbances, there's growing demand for our beaches, and there's fewer places for them to raise their families, to feed, and to rest. And so one of the messages, and all of these messages come from the Atlantic Coast Piping Plover Strategic Communications Plan. So I'm not this clever. I just want to give credit where credit is due. And also, many of those data slides, I forgot to say when I was showing them, were from New Jersey DEP in terms of the statewide data. So our beaches are irreplaceable homes for plovers. And another thing to emphasize is that the areas we close off for plovers benefit other species. We have American oyster catchers, we have least and common terns, also sea beach amaranth, which is a federally threatened plant, all benefit from the space that we make for the plovers to be able to breed. And so these birds have evolved to be in very dynamic locations. A spit like Sandy Hook, it's geologically and geomorphologically very dynamic, and it changes all the time. And so they need to have, there's not very many piping plovers left, and so we need to be able to make a space for them on these very dynamic coastal beaches. So they can be hard to see, and so when that's one thing to communicate to folks, you know, they might say, oh, I can go in there, I'm gonna see them. I've had visitors before tell me, oh, we were watching, we were looking for them. I can tell you, I've looked for many nests, and I still find, like, I walk like I'm on eggshells when I'm looking for a nest, because it can be so hard to see them. And the other thing we need people to understand is that if they get too close to the birds, especially if they're nesting, and they get them up off their nest, that's energy that the adults are spending, or if they're feeding and we flush them away, if the chicks are disturbed while feeding, or even the adults are disturbed while feeding, that's energy that they're expending to avoid humans and to avoid our presence and the threat that they perceive us to be. And that's time they're not spending feeding, and that's energy that they're expending to get out of that threat, as opposed to being able to feed. We also want to talk about that we can share the beach. There's enough beach for everyone. We have lifeguarded beaches here that are designated specifically for recreation. And we have beaches here at Sandy Hook that are specifically managed for the shorebirds and for nesting season. But we have enough beach where we can all have some space and coexist. We want people to look from a distance. Binoculars and spotting scopes are a great way to enjoy them. Jonathan talked about pets. They perceive pets, they perceive any kind of pet, usually it's dogs, but I've actually encountered someone with their cat on the beach. It can be any kind of pet, but they're going to perceive that as a threat. Trash and food scraps that are left out attract predators, and that creates a threat to the birds. We don't want people to feed wildlife, and also cats, keeping cats indoors. You know, cats are a great pet, but they're best served inside where they aren't acting as a predator. And you're already doing the bottom line. You're here as a volunteer ambassador. Yay for you. So I think I maybe already covered this. A lot of people will tell me though, oh, my dog, someone actually 2 weeks ago told me, my dog doesn't go in there. And I was just wondering, how did you train your dog to know where the string line starts and ends? I can't get my dog to do anything, so they're obviously much better than I am. But, another thing about dogs is, we restrict them primarily for the birds, but it's also a human health and safety issue. Having dog excrement on the beach, or having dogs running around where there's some people that aren't comfortable around dogs. So having dogs always on leash. And so the dates at Sandy Hook, our dogs are not allowed on our ocean beaches from March 15th to September 15th, but from September 16th to March 14th, they are welcome on the ocean beaches on a leash, always on a leash. And we're really lucky because many national parks do not allow dogs any place that a car cannot go. And we allow dogs everywhere except on the ocean beaches all year long on a leash. And at Sandy Hook, we allow them on the bay side, so they can still be here then. And then I think of talking with people and engaging with people on these issues relating to piping plover as building shared stewardship. And I just want to, what law enforcement said earlier, we're not enforcement. This badge does not make me enforcement. I am education and outreach the same as you. And sometimes it can be trying, because you can talk to, I've had days where I've talked to over 40 people with dogs on the beach. Not here at Sandy Hook, that's in our New York unit. And it can be really hard to talk to someone, because I'm talking to them. For them, it's the first time. For me, it's the 35th time. And I'm tired, and I'm hot, and I'm hangry, and I just want people to read the signs and pay attention. But I need to make sure that I'm speaking with them as if they've never heard this before, even though I'm sure they've seen the million signs. But I got to give them the benefit of the doubt. I need to, and I also need to remind myself that maybe no one has ever spoken to them about piping plover, or about any kind of natural resource issue, or about thinking about the beach as anything other than a place to go and go swimming or lay out or have a good time. And so if I approach them and I interact with them in a way that puts them off, that might be then lost forever. But if I can find a way to try to be approachable, to not be judgmental, to be engaging, to be open, then I might be able to not only help them to understand what they have to do or to do the right thing, but they may then become our allies, become shared stewards, and be able to talk to other people and help to promote what we want to promote, which is the conservation of the species. So thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I truly value and appreciate each of you for being here today. Thank you so much.